Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of The Only Ways Ethics. And I'd like to welcome Yasmin Karsan. Thank you ever so much to Yasmin for joining us on this episode. Really looking forward to it. And our last episode was our first panel discussion about the 10-year plan. And I'm sure we'll come on to that at some point during our chat. Welcome. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to you just to give us a bit of about your background as a clinician and how you got into digital health.
Amazing. Hi, Dean. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm really, really excited for these questions and this episode. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Yasmin. I'm a pharmacist, clinical safety officer, and an AI consultant. So obviously I started my career in pharmacy, worked around hospital, community, and kind of my parents own a few community pharmacies. So I've sort of been embedded in this world for a very, very long time. And after I did my rounds of clinical practice, I kind of was looking for a new challenge. So I went and did a PhD, which basically looked at the role of pharmacy in the wider NHS viewpoint. So that was really interesting because it got me exposed to a lot of policy makers. Where does the funding go? How is funding distributed? And at that point as well, it was really interesting because that was the time where we went through, I think, 4 governments in 4 years or something. We all remember that time.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to see the dynamic change and the political heaviness that the NHS has within politics, essentially. So it's not just healthcare, it's a very, very big political point within the party's manifestos. So that was really interesting to kind of write about that, especially from a pharmacy perspective, because from different areas it's perceived as in and outside the NHS. So that was interesting. And then after that I thought, you know what, I want to start a company. So I joined an accelerator to find a co-founder, and me and my group always joke that it's basically Love Island meets The Apprentice, because you are matching with someone, and then you're having to do these apprentice-like challenges. So we would be running around the Columbia Flower Market trying to film an advert for something, and it basically got you into a role of how do you work with people, and how, can you work with someone under stress and under, a time limit. So that was really great. We didn't end up getting investment, but it got me exposed to the whole venture capital landscape, which I didn't really know much about before, and understand the role of health technology within this landscape. It was also at the beginning where Babylon was just starting off, and all these other health technology companies had just started, converting to kind of entering digital health, as it were, in a more mainstream way. And so that was really interesting. And then from that, I realized myself and my engineer co-founder were speaking kind of different languages, actually. I would ask for something and he would do that, but it would be in his perceived way, which was interesting. So, if you were saying, okay, can you build X? He'd build it, but it wouldn't be how I would envision it. And that is where I thought, you know what, let me see if I can do this coding thing. So I took a couple of lessons with this company called Code First Girls, which I would actually highly recommend to anybody wanting to be exposed to any kind of coding. And I learned Python, and actually I really enjoyed it. So I then went and did a master's in AI, and this was just before the LLM, large language model boom. We had to learn how to hard code a lot of different models, train different models. It was a great course. And it was built on the Python that I learned. So I managed to kind of accelerate what I'd learned and start doing some real hard coding, which sort of got me to a point where I am now, which is, so after that, then I started my clinical safety consultancy, which is digital clinical safety. And actually it was my husband that told me to kind of go into this. He is a clinical safety officer, and he's always been in the compliance role. He was a pharmacy inspector, And then I thought, you know what, compliance is really boring. Like, I don't really want to do this. But when I got my first client and I got into it, I was like, this is amazing. This is
I
the
love it.
perfect
Yeah.
marry between
Yeah.
my clinical knowledge and my technical knowledge. I can
Hmm.
speak the languages of product managers, of engineers, but also to clinicians and care team members to get
Yeah.
both sides to really understand how, you know, what are the risks, because inherently as a pharmacist you are 100% risk averse. You learn about risk management from day dot. So this was literally kind of like the perfect triangle of taking all of
Yeah.
my knowledge into one. And you know what, I absolutely love it. So right now I can categorically say compliance is not boring. It is fantastic and really interesting in this space.
No, thank you for that, Yasmin. And it's great because every single episode that I do, I learn more and more about my guests. Because you think sort of like, you know, obviously we've spoken before and stuff like that, but it's like, you know, I don't know the whole backstory. And it's absolutely fantastic because that's why we do sort of like the only way is ethics. For people to sort of like to learn. So you were talking about, I'm just coming back, and apologies for me sort of like directing my gaze to the left because I was just scribbling some notes down. Did you say Code First Girls, was it?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. What we'll do for everyone listening is I'll get some information about that, and we'll pop it out onto this episode as well. That'll be absolutely fantastic. And you know what? It's really great to see, because I think we're finding in the clinical safety officer community at the moment, it's either those people that work for the manufacturer and those people that work for the health organisation, and never the twain shall meet. Or we're in, and I don't know whether you agree, but it'd be interesting to get your view. The landscape at the moment is very much full of very junior clinical safety officers. At the moment, there's lots of people training. There's lots of people being trained. How they're exposing themselves to clinical risk management, I don't know, and I don't know the percentage. It would be interesting to know, sort of UK wide, how many people are actually doing their training, but then are actually going on to apply clinical risk management activities. Because as you know, we train CSOs and we train quite a lot of them, but I get very worried that the people aren't going out there. And the reason I'm saying this, and sort of coming back to your sort of like your sort of chat and conversation, is that I'm very much from, you know, you may know or may not know, I worked for a supplier for IMS Maxims for 11 years. Therefore, like yourself, I'm well rehearsed around design, development, lifecycle engineering, QA, all of the, you know, the whole application support, that the whole organisation, how it runs in relation to that. But also have been exposed to projects. I was clinical lead for an interim EPR deployment, etc. Therefore, we know it from both sides of the fence. And I think that's absolute gold dust in relation to what we do and how we can apply that to our roles as clinical safety officers. And it's not something that you see sort of like a lot, especially from your side, where you're actually coding yourself as well in relation to that. So it's really interesting. So from your clinical background, you come into this world of digital. How do you think that sort of like, you know, that helps you within that sort of like that innovation space? And if there's anyone out there that's listening and thinking, oh, I'd like to do this, you know, what would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think apologies, I've got this dry cough that I can't even get rid of, and I'm a pharmacist. Essentially, I think my clinical role has been essential to being able to develop my role in digital health. I think mainly because, so generally in the clinical safety roles that I've taken and take with my clients, I sit in product and engineering. I don't actually sit with the clinical team. So as the only clinician within a lot of these stand-ups, a lot of these meetings, you are bringing that clinical viewpoint, which is really important to patient safety, to digital clinical safety. And that's where, I think it's really important to kind of still have that hand in clinical practice. I still do 1 day a week at the pharmacy because I actually love patients.
Excellent.
And I do,
yeah.
And I'm a prescriber and I love having that patient interaction, but it doesn't have to be that full on. I think still keeping up to date with your CPD, continual professional development, and all of that is still really key to be able to give your clinical insight within these groups. And then, like you said, when you sit with product and engineering and designers, they are bringing these fantastic life cycles that we may not see or know about, having come from a clinical background. I mean, the one thing we know is the audit cycle, and that's probably about it. So you're learning more about how does a product go from discovery to all the way to release. And that's really important as well, because then you can start to target, okay, where does adding clinical insight be important in terms of, is it at the beginning in the discovery phase, or is it right at the end once everything's built? And generally, I like to be there at the inception so that the engineers aren't tirelessly working, building a product for you to then turn around and say, actually, that's not clinically safe, so let's go back. Right, exactly. So this is all about bringing efficiencies and safety to this clinical product lifecycle, which in part adds innovation as well, because the the knowledge of the designers and the products, they might not be from a clinical background, they might be from a different one. So bringing your own viewpoint is essential, because you might see, for example, in a really low example, I might see patients coming in to the pharmacy and clicking, what they want on an iPad, and the amount of clicks counts because that's their time that you're taking. Whereas a designer might say no, or whereas somebody in a different clinical practice might be like, no, you know what, we have to take every single detail. So the form has to be 20 pages long, and that's the only way it can be. And, that's where you can start to work with different clinicians, different designers, different subject matter experts to kind of come to a point that is clinically safe, innovative, but also relevant and user friendly. Because the worst thing is you don't want a product that's not going to be used by the users you're building it for.
Oh, totally. And I couldn't agree more. And, sometimes I rack my brains because, we both work with both clinical safety officers. We both work with sort of like, startups, SMEs, and sort of like all different sizes, sort of like organizations. And sometimes it does baffle me because, look, I'm a clinician first and foremost, nurse by background for those that don't know on the listening in. And having worked for sort of an EPR supplier for sort of like such a long period of time, for me, and I still believe this, it's an absolute no-brainer that you have clinical input as a startup in relation to that.
Yeah.
But yet we do find that a lot of these organisations, they don't have clinicians that work for them. And I know that can be very difficult for them, and I can understand, but also don't have that sort of input and sort of go out there and try their best in relation to what they think is right. And I think this is where a lot of those organisations fall down and really struggle. Because it's like, then we come in, like you say, we come in as clinical safety officers. We have that experience, because I think people need to know in the audience as well, as a clinical safety officer, those people that have been doing it for a period of time, we don't just bring the risk management, the whole compliance piece. We bring X amount of years digital health knowledge in relation to that, which again is absolutely key. To be able to do our jobs as well in relation to what we're doing. So I think it's really difficult at the moment, because we are finding, as there's a lot more startups out there, and there's a right and there's a wrong way to sort of like development. like you say, if you bring in a clinical safety officer, or if you start looking at regulatory compliance, X amount of sort of months sort of down the line or on your development life cycle, you're like, right, what I find is, and it'd be good to get your view, is the mentality is, let's build something, then we'll bring these guys in.
Yeah.
And that's the frustration, because they don't realise, they haven't read around the subject area, they don't know that the importance of, like you say, you've got to come in section. There's nowhere else to come in from a clinical risk management perspective. You know, there has to be upfront clinical risk management. It's safety by design. You know, it's the whole point in relation to what we're doing. But I don't know what your experiences are in relation to that.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what you say, Dean. Safety by design. And to be honest, I have actually been really fortunate that the clients I've had and have are really open to clinical safety and have brought me in at the point of, well, they've either had a clinical safety officer at inception and I'm just taking over, or you know, they're just really open and they're saying, you know, join this, tell us what we need to do, let's work together. And they've been really, really open to kind of amend and go through it piece by piece. I think what the perception sometimes tends to be is that, especially if you don't know the company already, is the perception that clinical safety are just going to be blockers or say no, no, no. And so sometimes the teams can be quite standoffish to clinical safety. And this is where totally. This is where I think relationship building is so key and so important. And I feel like that is actually 50 to 60% of the job, because Absolutely. Understanding the clinical risk, we can do that with our eyes closed, but garnering and retrieving the information from your clients, from their teams, getting everyone on board to, you know, have an incident management process, engage in it, all of those kind of things are up to the team and the culture itself. So I have been really fortunate with the clients that I've had that are really open to clinical safety, and that's been amazing and fantastic. But what I would say is I kind of just really focus on building those really good relationships and use that as a key to kind of open the doors to say, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And not really just come in and say, you have to do X, Y, and Z, or, you know, it's our way, my way, or no way, basically, because that never goes down well.
No, it doesn't. And you're absolutely right. You know, if you come in all guns blazing and expect people to sort of like, you know, it's not about ruling with an iron rod, is it? It's going in and sort of understanding the organisation. And you're absolutely right. It's key. It's building those relationships. And that's what it's all about, and it's that level of understanding as well in relation to it's making the organisation understand that what you're doing is beneficial to their whole processes. And I'm a big advocate. I say to these organisations, you should be shouting this from the rooftops to say we are compliant. Yeah, we are. You know, this is best practice, and this is what we're doing. We are making. You know, we are designing our platforms to be safe in relation to what we're doing. We have a culture of safety, and it's that safety first sort of like approach and principles in relation to everything that we're doing. So AI.
Yeah.
This is where we sort of like, you know, it's absolutely at the forefront at the moment. Conversations, whether it's, you know, talking about the adoption of ABTs or other technologies that are out there to the benefit of healthcare and its delivery, or as lots of people are very worried around that. And, you know, yourself, you've done your masters. I haven't done that to that level, but, you know, took a postgrad course at Oxford University last year on the principles of AI, which was really interesting and really gives you sort of like an insight into that whole sort of like, you know, and also, again, introduces the whole thing of business process modeling, which is something that I think a lot of organizations don't do. and they should. And people will realise quite quickly as well in relation to that it helps us so much in relation to clinical risk management and risk assessing. A picture says 1,000 words, as I always say, in relation to that. But we've got AIs at the forefront, and we are applying DCB0129 and 160. And how do they stand up at the moment? I know there's revisions happening, and we're going to be seeing all of this nice stuff, and hopefully that includes AI. We'd like to think. If it doesn't, then it's a worry. How do you think they stand up at the moment in relation to AI technologies and the application of the standards?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Dean. I think it's literally at the forefront of everyone's mind right now, because AI is it's the buzzword. It has been the buzzword for the last kind of 2 years. And I think obviously the standards themselves are quite open to interpretation. However, when it relates to something as dynamic as AI, I think obviously we're going through revisions. There does need to be some revision to focus on caveating the challenges and the validation requirements that AI requires, especially from a digital health perspective, where the risk appetite is quite low. And it should be, because if you're going to have a machine that's going to be making decisions, then we need to be very risk averse on this. And that's not totally to say that it can't happen, because it totally can, right? Like innovation is great. But I think, we just all need to be mindful as safety officers, but also in this world of ever-changing quick technology, like it's changing very, very fast, that the standards do need to reflect that. And we also need to be able to, I guess, protect our position in the sense that we are registered clinicians. As clinical safety officers, we are accountable. And so we also need to be sure that when we are reviewing as per the DCB0129 and 160 standards, that we are also assured within ourselves that we are happy that these companies using AI are compliant. And the way to do that is to have the standards as a backbone to support us. I feel. Sorry, I'm not sure to answer the question.
No, you're absolutely right, because I think we're at that point, Yasmin, aren't we, in relation to sort of AI and sort of like compliance, that within the UK, for those listening, in comparison to Europe have the EU AI Act, which is now mandated, and that's changed that whole landscape. Especially also if you relate that then to medical device regulation, AI as a medical device clearly falls in Class 2A classification now within the medical device regulation, and we need to see similar moves within the UK. I understand there is already a blueprint that has been created by the government for an AI Act, and it just needs sort of obviously review, consultation, go through all the normal processes to be switched on. I'm going to put my neck out there and say I hope that happens within the next 12 months. It'd be really good to see something like that, because it will give us a steer, it will give us a standpoint. We already know we've got 42,001 30440 in relation to data validation within a healthcare setting, but and also AMLAS to a certain extent around the assurance of machine learning for autonomous systems. But nothing's mandated. We've got no mandated AI policy or procedure at the moment. So as we know, Yasmin, sometimes the attitude is from the manufacturer side more so than the health organisation, is that it's not mandated, I don't need to worry about it. And then you get someone like us come along who, like you said previously, oh God, look, blocker, someone that's going to sort of cause there's that person that causes issues. And we're saying, well, you really need to do this and you really need to do this. And they're just like, oh yeah, you're just sort of like, so I think it's really difficult. So it'd be really good in the revision of 129 and 160 that we do see some move towards some mandation of sort of AI principles in relation to what we're looking at, because obviously, and this leads us, I think, quite nicely onto sort of like that whole piece around. Look, for me, the differences are, we've got, like you said, you've got these algorithms, because let's face it, AI, big data processor.
Yes, basically.
That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. For those listening, to try and simplify it and bring it down to a sort of like, it has, information going in, sort of like it has inputs. Yeah. And then you've got all these fancy algorithms within it. Yeah. And whether it's, supervised learning, unsupervised, then there are outputs in relation to that. But obviously, we're talking about a lot of information, and it's about what happens to that information within those sort of like those algorithms. And we hear lots about black box in relation to that. And again, for the audience, in relation to black box, this is where the AI itself is a decision maker, is making decisions around that data, what it does with that data and how it interprets that data, etc., and is learning, in which we class as unsupervised learning in relation to that. And is quite scary in relation to all of that. So I think it's having the confidence, isn't it? And mentioning those words: bias, transparency, explainability in relation to those. And it would be good to sort of get sort of what your approach, or maybe what you'd advise in relation to you've worked with 129 and 160 and sort of an AI technologies, and what potentially would be your approach.
I think it's really interesting you say what you said, Dean, because we also had the AI airlock. And so that report should be coming out soon. Do the listeners know? Well, I'm sure.
No, explain.
Oh, sorry.
No, explain. Please explain.
So the MHRA AI airlock was a project, program, where they onboarded companies to run their AI algorithms within a sandbox environment. So a sandbox environment is basically a closed environment where the regulators can see what the AI is doing, and the businesses can run their algorithms within this area. And then you can it was in hope to demonstrate explainability, or to kind of guide the regulators to start to develop more innovative supportive or innovation supportive regulation, because they don't want to hinder innovation by developing new regulation, but they do want it to be safe. So I think the report should be coming out over the next few weeks, which will be really interesting to read. And I hope that those amending the DCB0129 and 160 take into account that report. I was really fortunate to be able to sit on the stakeholders for the AI airlock and review. It was fantastic to see the different companies and what kind of things were generated. And obviously explainability was a really big just point that came from there. And that's kind of what we want as clinicians. And then just going back to the initial question of, how would I do it? And I think as safety officers, we are trained in documentation. So I would try and be as transparent as possible within our documentation. And like you said, AI is a big data processor. So I would hope to see a huge section on data, to include what is the data set, any missing data, any cleansing of data, and what are the processes that have gone to mitigate bias. Where is the data set coming from? depending on where and what type of product or innovation it is, you would hope to have a representative data set, across the country, because if these algorithms are informing any kind of clinical practice or any kind of decision, one of the biggest worries, and rightly so, is this disparity in inequality that can be garnered from the data. So whether, not just in healthcare, even if you're a mortgage company, the amount of times they run algorithms on your postcode, and if you don't live in an affluent area, you're like, how is any of this fair, really? So yeah, I think from what I say as well to other clinicians and pharmacists that aren't even in clinical safety, I'm like, even if you're in a pharmacy and you're utilizing this technology, it is our responsibility to ensure that our patients are still being treated equally and fairly. And if we don't understand how the algorithm works, or don't understand that data that is input or continually input and learning from, then how can we support our patients in a way that we want to? Because we don't want to increase the gap in inequality,
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. What you've just said around, if we don't understand, and I spoke at Het North last year, and it was just when, was it? I think it was last year. I'm sure it was. It was the start of last year. It was in February, March last year, on AI and clinical risk management, and I was just in the throes of doing this AI course. Which was very sort of like, very emotive for me, because looking at the NHS at the time and looking at LinkedIn, and lots of different stories, and it was like, look, and having worked in digital health for so long and knowing the mentality of clinicians that are out there are like, ooh, look, the shiny new thing, isn't that pretty? I want it. Yeah, without even looking at it, it's like, whoa, hang on a second.
Yeah.
So what is the need for you procuring this? What does it do? Have you asked the right questions?
Exactly.
Do you know what AI is in relation to that? So I asked to the audience, and I said, like, there was a few. I just threw out a few sort of phrases in relation to sort of like, unsupervised, supervised, classification, all this. There's like just a few things, and I was like, can anyone explain to me what? And they all just looked at me, and I said, right, what I'm trying to get to is, if you don't understand, how are you supposed to risk assess something that you don't have a clue of what it's actually doing? So you're putting yourself at risk in relation to that. And you could see all these sort of light bulb moments going off around the room, and everyone's sort of like, oh, it's okay. And someone actually did sort of like, someone of sort of prominence from the Manchester area, I won't say who it was, but actually stood up and said, when we had questions at the end, what are NHS England doing sort of like in relation to that, and what are they doing to move it forward? And hopefully, I know it's taken quite a while, but I think this year with the revision, we're all sitting with bated breath, aren't we? To see what happened, because whether you were part of those working groups and the consultations, etc., which I thankfully was for 129, they still haven't come out for public consultation. At the moment, I know they'll say, yeah, but we only had it. The 160 working groups were in June, so they've happened. So we're only in July, the end of July. So I think we're looking towards sort of like, I'm hoping October, November time, we're going to start seeing something, which is nice, just before Christmas. And then hopefully in the new year, so next year, we start seeing something sort of like something happen.
Some implementation.
But we need to, I think from my perspective, I don't know on your views on this. I think things are moving too slow in relation to raising awareness around AI. And I think we could be doing more. And I know we are definitely doing more. We're creating a course for predominantly aimed at health organisations, and there have been delays, but we will be getting that out, because we need to raise awareness. We need people to sort of like, we need people to step up to the mark. Lots of organisations I go into, and again, sorry, I'm sort of like I'm going on, but I will come to you.
No.
It is that, and getting your views on, what is the preparation of organisations, and are they sort of like prepared? Are they implementing 42001? So sort of over to you. Sort of.
No, honestly, Dee, I think you are 100% right in this. I think there needs to be more education and awareness. I think we see the utility of AI in a positive and negative way every single day. We open our social media, the algorithms are prepared for us. We have open our emails, we've got summaries already at the top. It's already embedded in mainstream, but are we extrapolating what we know and what we see in our normal life that on the impact of what it could have in a healthcare capacity? We, like you mentioned, we've discussed, you mentioned ambient voice technology. There have been reports where some of these ambient voice technologies have summarized in a wrong capacity, certain consultations, and maybe for an email, summarizing in a wrong way is okay because you can quickly glance at the real email. But if you had a summary on someone's electronic health record, where do you find the main transcript? And as a clinician and also a safety officer, how can we kind of have these mitigations or have the assurance that it's doing what it said on the tin? And I think the more that is education, awareness, the more that we can empower ourselves and our team and our other individuals within our area to ask the right questions, because a lot of the time it is about just being able to ask the right questions that relate to your subject area, so that you can start having these validated methods to represent the AI that's being used, but also then inform the risk management processes. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, and you're absolutely right. It's asking, like you said, asking the right questions, making sure that process is in place. And I think that's where we come in, because I'm not sort of damping down NHS England and the role that they play, but they are a small team. The digital clinical safety team, they are a small team, and we're here to support them. I think the independent sector we should be collaborating, we should be playing together with NHS England, because as you know and I know, the knowledge base within the independent sector is far greater on regulatory compliance than in NHS England. And I don't know all the answers, but there must be something that we can do together,
exactly,
to actually move this forward, because we're going to get to a place, and you said it yourself, Yasmin, that asking the right questions. But the problem is, if you don't have the expertise, and health organisations, a lot of them don't, they don't know what questions to ask.
Exactly.
We see it already with DTAC, and sort of and that's a whole new different conversation. Where's AI in DTAC in relation to that? And where you get health organisations, and I feel sorry for some of the startups out there that get a hard deal, because health organisations are using DTAC to the letter of the law, and innovators are going elsewhere in relation to that. Because at the moment, in its present state, DTAC is I don't know the percentage, but it's stifling innovation. In relation, it's putting people off, because we all know as well. Look, there's been so much conversation recently about the cost of regulation, and yes, we know it comes with a price, and that's for a good reason. but also it'd be good to get your take on. I was going to leave this till the end, but I think now's a good time to sort of go through it. You know, the 10-year plan has come in, and there's all talk about the innovators passports. And at first, it scared me off, and you know, I put a response into a LinkedIn post saying, "Well, we need to really sort of slow down and do this properly." But now I'm sort of looking at it and say, yeah, I am for it, but it needs to be done in the right way in relation to that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, I was going to, before we get onto the innovator's passport, I was just going to mention quickly as well. That's the reason I really like the whole AI airlock thing, was because it brought all the stakeholders together. You know, it brought everyone from all over the place to kind of have that discussion. And I do think that's kind of what we need in our, because we already have such a great community in the clinical safety world. And I think being able to help each other and bounce ideas off each other, and maybe even you know, support each other with the types of questions and education would be really helpful to elevate the standard of understanding across the board. Because at the end of the day, it is about patient safety. And if we all, you know, if we all learn, then we're all elevating. So I think from that point, I hope NHS England are taken into account. Obviously they had their workshops and the discussions, and then I hope that kind of continues, because you're right, a lot of us in the independent sector, because we're on the ground with, you know, in the thick of it with the people, we see these problems and solutions on a day-to-day, and it might be that someone might have the same problem and might not find the solution somewhere else in the country. And I think that's where, you know, LinkedIn, KCSO Coffee and Chat, like all of those things are amazing to really bring everyone together and have that open dialogue without feeling threatened or, you know, defensive about anything within to do with this. So I'd love to see a bit more of AI discussion around that, which would be fantastic. And yeah, so the 10-year plan, it was really interesting, I thought. I thought the vision is fantastic. I think in terms of, because obviously I did my PhD on a similar sort of topic, you start to see, okay, there's a plan for 10 years, but then there's an election bang in the middle of it. So then you've got to see, okay, at which point, where does one have to get from 0 to 4 to demonstrate that the continuation can occur? And, you know, having the NHS as such a political tool, it's going to be interesting on how fast the government can move this dial. In terms of the innovator's passport, I was obviously really excited, being an innovator and an entrepreneur. This was incredible for me. But like you said, I think the regulation side, compliance side, needs to be heavily embedded in this, because you can't just go from 0 to release without any form of risk management, compliance, anything like that, because we all know what would happen if that happens.
Well, my concern is, and you probably relate to this as well, is that because the whole premise, so when I read through the whole sort of like the government piece on what the plan is that, you know, you can release this to one health organisation to do all the work and all the sort of like, you know, the sort of like, you know, the trials, etc., you know, the pilots, and then rubber stamp it and then say, we can now release with aggression across the rest. However, as we both know, is that all depends. If that health organisation has really immature regulatory compliance experience and doesn't really sort of like know, and also the manufacturer is in the same sort of boat, it's almost like, and I don't like using this phrase, but it's almost like the blind leading the blind in relation to, they all go, everything's great and it's all fine. It gets rubber stamped, and then it gets moved on, and it's like you can't do that. And as we know, you need to account for those clinical workflows and the delivery of care management is so different between each organisation. So we can't just look, we may be jumping the gun. Yeah, absolutely. You can't just lift and shift. And we may, I'm in sympathy for you. I think, Yasmin,
Sorry.
I've got a dry throat as well. And we may be jumping the gun here because reading sort of like between the lines at the moment, there's been no mention of digital health in relation to the innovators passport at the moment, because the examples they gave clearly sat within the physical devices and technology sort of framework. However, so many people are talking about it within the digital health space that it's going to happen.
Yeah, I
think to that.
What's really interesting is that obviously the whole plan focuses on AI first, digital first, yet the innovator's passport is reflecting something else.
I know.
So I think, yeah, definitely. And the other thing I should have mentioned earlier, but I didn't think until now, was when you're working in health organizations, you obviously have the business needs and the key performance indicators you have to reach within a delivery timeline. Yep. And that also can, how do I say this? That also can kind of instigate teams to utilize DCB and DTAC as a tick box exercise, which completely negates its point.
Absolutely.
Which is also another kind of worry when it comes to the innovation passport, because you can't just tick box regulation. You've got to embed it safety first from the inception, so that it doesn't become kind of a ball and chain later on, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. Totally makes sense. And it's sort of, sometimes there's the attitudes from organisations that it's like, we won't get any expertise in, or we'll have a go ourselves. You get those sort of attitudes. But I will sort of like say to sort of like the audience or anyone listening, if they're on that roadmap, is that please, and this isn't sort of me promoting sort of like the independent sector, etc., to get work, but please go and get advice. We are here first and foremost to advise and guide. And I know you guys, yourself, Yasmin, able to do that. And there's lots of CSOs out there. If someone reaches out by email or picks up a phone and wants to speak to someone, the majority of them aren't going to say no, or aren't going to sort of say, sign this contract before I give you any advice. Look, we're here to help. And exactly. In relation to that, and you need to get that professional advice and guidance before you make your decisions. Don't go ahead, because all you're doing, you're wasting your resource and your time in relation to what you're doing, because I guarantee you're not going to do the best job at it. And when you get someone in to support you and help you, they're just going to start again. That's all they're going to do, because we see it so many times. So it's just to empower people in relation to that. When you were talking about the whole AI piece and, what's going on over here, and we need to be well informed, ask the right questions, etc., little light bulb moment sort of like went off. Because I've been speaking to Dr. Keith Grimes, who you may have seen sort of like at the last sort of health tech dinner as well. Great guy. We're in the same space, and we're banging the same drum, which is absolutely like sort of key to this. And we were talking about what can we do, and I think we need to continue that conversation. And what is it we can do? Surely, and you mentioned sort of coffee and chat and other sort of like forums. We need an AI forum. We need something, don't we? So we do. Off of this call, but also to the audience as well, if you're listening in, please give us some ideas. Give us your thoughts around how we can push this forward. What can we do as a collective to try and raise awareness nationally in relation to AI, its adoption, so that we can assist and we can help in relation to that. Brilliant.
That's fantastic. I think that would be amazing, because also you just get so many people with questions, ideas, and just different understandings of their view of AI and how it's being used in their organizations.
Yeah, and it's almost like sort of why haven't we got sort of like we need a sort of like sandbox that we can sort of like, I know there was sort of like airlock, but maybe through your connections through that sort of like you might have people that we can speak to say that, and
maybe we should build our own. That would be fun.
Maybe we should build our own sandbox and get get people together to support that. And and be there to like give advice and guidance to sort of like people in relation to that'd be absolutely fantastic. So pharmacy meets digital.
Sorry. Yeah.
The future of medicine's optimization. It's big at the moment, and it really is. And I'm working with quite a few organisations in relation that are getting the IM1 integration in relation to sort of like taking pharmacy to the patient, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And for the patient making the decisions in relation to sort of like what they're doing. But obviously that comes with when we're supporting personalised prescribing, that comes with risk.
Yeah.
In relation to that, especially if we're going to be using, AI as well, and that just worries me even more in those high risk areas where people start mentioning AI and sort of like that, sort of making recommendations in relation to medication. It'd be really good to get your views in relation to that, and sort of that whole, especially with that design and development sort of like background in engineering as well.
I think it's really interesting what's happening with AI in pharmacy at the moment. So we've started to see a lot of, we call them PMR systems, so patient medicine records. When you go into the pharmacy, you give your prescription, they're typing and they get the label out. So these systems now are using AI to clinically check prescriptions. So before, a pharmacist would need to review a prescription to check it's clinically and ethically okay. So for example, if they haven't written the controlled drug in words and figures, then that's not legally okay. It needs to go back. So now that they're electronic prescriptions, these PMR systems can now use AI to clinically check. And the pharmacist only needs to clinically check a percentage to ensure the algorithm is doing okay. And generally, they only run it on low risk prescriptions. So maybe one or two items. I'm not entirely sure what their parameters are, but a certain big EHR company, which has a PMR system, recently had a prescription clinically checked for a blood pressure medicine, but the algorithm had checked. So what it does is, sorry, I've missed this key part where, so it checks the prescription, and then you scan the barcode of the medicine, and then it tells you whether that's correct or not. So a pharmacist doesn't have to do it. A pharmacist used to have to like tick the box, but now you can get the machine to do it. So this company has checked. So for example, the medicine is amlodipine. They have checked amlodipine 5 with an amlodipine 10 box. So this medicine, wrong medicine, went out to a patient. And I know this because I was chatting to a friend of mine who it happened to. This wrong medication went out to a wrong patient. Obviously, the patient saying, I know my medicine, this is the wrong one, can you give me the right one? But that company had gone back to the PMR system and they said, but this has been verified by 10 other pharmacies in the country, so we can't change it. And this is where I'm concerned in terms of where is their evaluation process? Where is their risk management process and their incident management process? And why are they not, irrespective of whether it's been checked by 10 or scanned the same box by 10, it just means that 10 have done the wrong thing by accident. Right. And and this is in AI and pharmacy, this is where my worry that these big organizations that are like, oh yeah, let's use AI, it's another thing to sell on top. but are you really checking its validity, its intended use, its correctness, all of that within these? And this is just obviously like a really minutiae but example, but it could be happening all over the country and we don't know because there isn't a proper incident management process, which
And
is
it's absolutely scary, isn't it, in relation to that? Because again, but this brings us back, Yasmin, to that lack of awareness in relation and proper process. And dare I say it's sort of like, I try not to bring in sort of like quality management system type stuff, but I'm an auditor for 13485, so I can't help it. And is process is having, and not process for the sake of process, but process that works for the organisation and is sort of supporting that whole workflow. Because if you had process in place and you have that incident happen, and then all of a sudden there's like, right, we need to revise this, we need to look at this, we need to do our root cause analysis, we need to go back, and it's not just a matter of, oh well, 10 other sort of pharmacists did this and it's okay. It's like, no, it means 10 others have done it and it's not okay.
Exactly.
in relation to that,
there are all these things like what do they call it, clinician fatigue, where you're just trusting, you're just scanning and trusting and clicking and trusting and yes, because you're so overrun. You're trusting this machine to do the right thing.
You become the robot.
That's what I mean, exactly. And so where is the safety process post deployment of these machines? And I think that's something that isn't actually really talked about at all. In fact, a lot of the chats now are mainly about, okay, so what about when we build it? How are we, validating? How are we grabbing the audit? How are we demonstrating that it did the right thing in pilot and now, it's going to do the right thing at scale? But actually, post deployment, what are you doing when something does go wrong? And what are your processes to mitigate, add more controls, change, whatever it is you're going to do? And to retrain the model, where is that conversation? And I think that's where these companies who see AI as a shiny new thing need to start thinking about.
And I think we need to sort of, it's really interesting on that point, because I don't know whether you saw the LinkedIn post about hallucinations, and a really good point. Apologies to the audience, I can't remember who the post was from, but I'll dig it out and I'll get the information. And I've written it down here from something you said earlier as well, is that the whole language around hallucinations, and it's a really good post by an AI guru, an expert. So it's someone with a track record. It's not just someone just spurting out sort of like stuff, that are saying about, we need to change the whole sort of language around hallucinations, that people think it's a hallucination, it's the AI doing something wrong. And he was actually saying it's not. What it is, it's the AI going off and applying the algorithm in a way that it thinks it should be applied, and coming back with the outputs. It is not actually doing something wrong. However, what it should highlight to people is that you need to then go back and review the data sets. Yeah, it needs retraining. What he was trying is putting the point forward, saying there is a whole process that then needs to happen. But what people are doing is pointing fingers and saying, "Oh, the algorithm's wrong. Like the algorithm's wrong," or they're sort of like, they're looking to areas where they should be focusing on all the sort of like those standard procedures to go through them to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Exactly. Because if you think about it, like we said, AI is a big data processor. It's based on maths. When is maths ever really incorrect, especially when a computer is doing it? It's just that it's making these connections that we perceive as hallucinating. But you're right, it's made the unsupervised connection because it thinks it's a connection, linked it, and then ran that statistical model to generate what we perceive as wrong. But to itself, it's not actually, it's just another mathematical calculation. I think sometimes, especially in the LLM world, we can forget that because it's using language that we love and is cuddly and, you know, nice and polite, we do forget that it's actually just words converted into numbers, converted into probability, converted back into words. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So scaling health tech as a founder and on your journey, what's the biggest lessons for you on that sort of like on that journey to sort of like, you know, maybe sort of like looking at sort of safety strategy, and also sort of like trying to stay grounded in relation to what you're doing, sort of like, you know, and don't get me wrong, that's not me saying that, you know, people shouldn't have the whole thing of reaching for the stars and sort of like and have a vision, but sometimes we can sort of try and get ahead of ourselves, don't we? Sort of like, you know, I know I have in certain circumstances and stuff, especially in digital, and it's like, oh, there's all these things, there's all these possibilities, and let's do it and do it all now, and sort of like try and move forward. And all of a sudden you have to go, whoa, hang on a second, you need all of this in place to be able to do that.
Yeah, no, I completely relate, because I am one of those brains as well that's like, oh, sky's the limit, let's just kind of run with it. But I think in terms of scaling in health tech, so I didn't mention this earlier as well, but I have founded a bioinformatics company where we essentially translate genomic lab reports into explainable understanding. And it does use AI, but traditional machine learning. And essentially with this, what has been really key is, I think, taking the time to actually understand the landscape. So know each of the parameters that are required to either sell in the private sector, well, any healthcare domain sector, really. So the way that I see the pillars are obviously regulation, compliance, business development, procurement, and then obviously the product itself needs to be working. So those are the kind of pillars I would see that you do need to spend time understanding and knowing how to navigate. And what's actually really helped me in this arena is networking, like meeting you, meeting Clive, meeting so many people, even just on LinkedIn, that you might not meet face to face, but maybe meet 3 years down the line. That has been an incredible kind of way to be able to network and meet people on the same lines, get different viewpoints, different understandings, and just gather more information that you might not, you know, you wouldn't retrieve from ChatGPT, because these are people's personal experiences, understanding of the sector, and to be honest, kind of really golden nuggets that you wouldn't be able to find. And that's why I really, really, you know, recommend anybody take the time to network with anyone and everyone. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a mum at the school gate, or if it's, you know, the CEO of NHS Trust Y, or whoever, you know. If you go in there just to ask the question, oh, what do you do? You know, how did you get into this? Just understanding someone's even pathway into their role is such great insight, because you can learn so much from other people, and you yourself can also give information that other people can learn from too. And I think that's where cultivating the relationship, like I wrote a post yesterday, I think I tagged you in it, just to say that meeting you, Lyndon, Clive, Keith, everybody has been amazing. And although we're in the same space, the community that is built, sharing knowledge, working with each other, is incredible, because it lifts up the knowledge of assurance, but also it allows the whole sector to grow and develop and evolve. You know, we already know how hard it is to deploy health technology across the NHS. If all of us founders discuss and provide solutions to each other of how we navigate it, then you're making that step easier for the next person and the next person. Hopefully, nationally, they'll make the pipelines easier to get into these places. So I think, from a founder point of view, in terms of scalability, just understanding those key pillars is really important, or gathering the information from your co-founders or your employees is really important.
Yeah, and I'll second that as well, Yasmin, because I think, like, you know, and we already mentioned it before earlier on in the podcast, is that, you know, go out and get the information. Don't sort of like, you know, steam ahead if you're misinformed, or you're sort of like, you know, never if you're second guessing on anything in relation to that, you need to take a step back, you need to pause, and you need to get the right information, because we're seeing it too often, and people start tripping over themselves. And all that's going to do is just delay. People don't realise it sometimes, do they, when they don't have the experience or they don't have the sort of like the knowledge base. But again, for anyone listening that it may be them themselves, or it may be sort of colleagues or friends, etc., that can sort of like, you know, put them in the right sort of, or reach out to us and we can sort of point them in the right direction in relation to that, because I think it's absolutely key.
Exactly.
Yasmin, we could sit here all day, I think, chatting about this. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on. We will get you back on, and we will get you on one of the sort of women in health tech panels as well, because there's much more to discuss. What I do with all my guests, if you've listened to the podcast, is just sort of, before you do leave, is just sort of put you on the spot. And if there is one takeaway that you can sort of like, you know, give to those that are listening, what would that be? Sorry, I know it's sort of
that's a really good question. I think the one takeaway for me from this podcast would be around the AI part, and that would be to understand the data. And if your gut is telling you that there is something wrong with this data and the algorithm, shout it from the rooftops, because no one is going to recognize until someone pulls out the error and starts, you know, instigating that that incident process, management process. So I think, yes, now we're moving to a world of data and data utility. So let's start understanding, what does this data mean? Is it the right type of data? And, you know, is there any bias baked in? Because the only way we're going to keep a fair and equal world and kind of reduce any kind of inequality is if we all understand what these programs are going to be built on.
Brilliant. No, absolutely fantastic, Yasmin. And again, thank you ever so much for joining us on The Only Way is Ethics, episode 26. And just to say to the audience, I hope you really enjoyed that. And again, just a reminder that you can find us on Spotify and on YouTube. And next week we have episode 27, where we'll be speaking to the founder of Mediskin AI, Shamoon, and we'll have lots to talk about his journey and the work that he is doing there. Thank you again, Yasmin.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you to everyone for listening.
Thanks.